Really well.
Okay, welcome to everybody who's already joined the session. Thanks for coming. We have a little improvisation today. We're nesting Facebook Messenger inside Run the World to try to bring all of our speakers in. In any case, I'm David Wheeler, the editor of Al-Fanar Media, and I'll be moderating the session today. I've been a journalist specializing in education and research all of my professional life. And I've really been surprised throughout my career at how little attention teaching gets, despite the fact that it's at the heart of education, second only to learning as an activity. Teaching is a craft, an art, and a science all rolled into one. In the past few months, many teachers and professors had to adapt to a new environment, the online environment, and that's obviously new to many of them. So today I'm really happy to get a chance to talk about teaching with a group of people who care about it. They've all been a kind of witness to history at a crucial moment in online education in the Middle East. So I'm going to go straight to them. And I'm happy to have with me Maha Bali, who's an associate professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University of Cairo. Maha, maybe you can give a little wave. Asmani Ismail, director of the International Foundation Program, which is at the University of Hertfordshire's campus, which is also in Egypt. And Efe Karlik, who's a specialist in international marketing and student recruitment at Koç University in Turkey. So welcome, everybody. And I wanted to, first of all, I just wanted to get a little sense of how.
David.
Welcome also, Ibrahim Al-Safadi, who's the CEO at the Luminous Group, which is a technical and vocational education provider in Jordan. So we've got a really great variety of perspectives here. And I wanted to start out just by asking all of you how the transition to online learning, I realize many of you may have had some online learning before the COVID-19 crisis, but how has this recent transition to 100% online learning gone? Just a quick summary of how the transition's gone. Efe, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, David, and also welcome all to joining us today. And also, I would like to thank in the very beginning to Al-Fanar Media and also for allowing us to be here today. As everybody experiencing right now after the COVID-19 experiences, like as Koç University, we moved to 100% online education system. But also, like before the events occurred, like we had already the system set up like as a supportive education model. That's why we didn't experience any hard times to move that kind of 100% online education experience. But there are still some problems or some negative effects of being in an online education that we will discussing today. And that's all from my side about how we manage at the moment about the online education. Maha, would you like to continue? David, your voice is mute, that's why we cannot hear Maha. I guess, David, your voice is muted. That's why we cannot hear Maha.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Maha. There might be a lag.
Now you are online, Maha. Like we can hear from now on.
Okay, thank you, Efe. That's
So at AUC, we have some faculty, some of our professors have some experience with blended and online learning, and some were quite digitally literate, but the majority needed help. So we have to train all of our professors on the basic tools. But of course, every course and every discipline and every class has a different need. And so we had to continue supporting our professors. I work at the Center for Learning and Teaching. So we had to continue to consult with them on specific things. And then, sometimes the the most standardized type of thing that we train most people on doesn't work for someone. They try it, it doesn't work for their subject, it doesn't work for their students. And then, of course, people had different connectivity issues, faculty and students alike. So some professors had to go to campus to be able to get good internet. There were a lot of people wanted to go with doing a lot of synchronous Zoom things, and this was not always convenient for students. There are families that have multiple people in the same household who need the same internet connection, whether they're in school or university or whatever, or working from home. So these have caused some problems, and there are other issues, I think, which we'll talk about later, related to this particular moment in time with this particular crisis, that the good practice of online learning that I've known for 15 years is different in this situation because people are isolated in other ways. So we'll come back to this later.
Okay, thank you. Ibrahim, tell us how the transition has gone for Luminous. You're in a different position. You've got vocational education, which I presume needs a lot of hands-on experience. How's the transition gone for you?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We in Luminous, we were planning from 3 to 4 years ago how to build a virtual college. And we've been working in that for the last 3 years. And our plan was to launch full virtual college by first quarter 2021 to reach most vulnerable low-income youth among the Arab world and Africa. So we have invested heavily in preparing the institutions. When we heard of COVID-19 crisis, we decided to go live within a month. When we heard of the lockdown in China and how the virus are spreading around, so we decided to move faster, even though that the part of the virtual college was already implemented in terms of student support, students acquisitions, and the students information system. But we were very lucky that Luminous have invested, and we've been able to go live immediately. For all our students, they've been able to continue their education. Our call center was running from 8 morning to 10 in the evening from home to support students to have the right support. The major issue we face, as Maha mentioned, is connectivity in the student side. So we immediately we build an operation war room where we can understand the challenge from the students, from the teacher, and how we can respond immediately.
Great, thank you. And if you can go ahead and mute your mic, Ibrahim, when you're not speaking, that'd be good. And lastly, Amani, how has things gone at your campus in Egypt?
Okay, well, interestingly, this campus, it's a brand new campus, so we just started.
Amani, can you sit up a little bit? Your head is at the bottom of your window. I'm
Sure.
There, great, thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So we just launched the campus in the fall. So we started teaching, our academic year started in October. And then just 5 months into it, we were hit by COVID-19. So we had already just been finishing our adjustment to having a new system and new students and new everything. And then we were hit by that. Now, luckily, we had at least one great thing going for us is because our home campus in the UK exists on Canvas in terms of, which of course I'm sure perhaps most of you or some of you have heard of it. You know, Canvas is one of the I guess better known systems in LMS world, and so our student work, feedback, etc., happens online as it is. Of course, classes, lab sessions, and so forth happen on campus physically, but having that as there prior to that really did help smoothen the transition a little bit. Now, to echo what Maha was saying earlier in terms of the level of preparation for a digital The transition did vary among not just students, but also most importantly faculty, because we all come with a different set of tools. But we found ourselves in a situation where we had to adjust and adjust fast. So the learning curve might have been, steeper in the beginning, especially as we tried to figure out what is the best way to not only deliver, because I think Zoom really got its claim to fame so much during this time period, really just, came of age, so to speak. I think it will always go down in history as, the kind of, the savior, or one of the saviors of this time, especially when people had to work from home. So the bigger challenge we had was in terms of carrying out assessments physically in class, transforming all of that material online. And that was that some kinds of modules, courses and materials do not easily lend themselves to that. Like, for example, in the sciences and the practical hands-on work, you were asking, of course, later or earlier rather about vocational training and how the more hands-on things are, the more challenging it becomes. But the transition, like I said, was steeper at the beginning, but then we started getting the hang of it eventually, because we were forced by time also. And the British semester is 12 weeks long, so there wasn't, everything is sort of accelerated as it was. And so there wasn't much time to really kind of take your pace, your comfortable pace, and trying to adjust. And we all had IT support handy. So we kind of just, huddled up also as a team to help each other. We had, as much as possible, also, kind of IT standby, if you will. We ourselves acquired a lot of skills also on the way. So did the students. They ended up applying or actually downloading applications they had never heard of. So, for example, when they were taking exams, they had to download CamScanner in order to, take the assessments online, as in sort of, in real time in the assessed period, like let's say 2 to 4 slots, write out the answers manually, take shots using their mobile, and upload them onto Canvas to get graded. And of course, we had to make adjustments, of course, that the home campus already does, which is extending the time periods for assessments to allow time for that extra procedural stuff that would not be happening had they been taking the assessments on campus. And of course, like you guys said, that there is more detail that we could share, but also as
okay. Right. Yeah, I want to move to the question of the day, which is teaching. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was sort of what is the most important factor that professors and teachers need to keep in mind when teaching in the online environment? And Maha, maybe I'll start with you for this, but if you could keep your answer brief so we can kind of move around.
I will, and we can point to the article that I recently wrote as well.
Right, sure. Right.
So I would say the most important thing is to know how to be human and authentic online. We all know how to do that in the classroom, but not everyone is used to trying to do it online. So try to connect on the social and emotional level with students. And this also means being aware of equity issues, like that students in this situation, the technology is one inequality that's happening there, but there's also how well they're dealing with the trauma is different, and how well they manage to communicate online. And so I think that I would like to see faculty investing time in learning how to connect emotionally with their students online and to be there for them, because the most important thing in education is actually that, and not the content that we're teaching them. They're going to learn the content. They can learn it online. They can learn it on their own. But it's the human connection and how to become a citizen and a human being in this situation that's hard.
Right. Yeah.
I'll post a link to my article in the chat.
Yeah, I really like that point that you made, because it is easy to become technology obsessed, or secondly, content obsessed. But ultimately, the goal of education is to kind of create better, richer human beings, not about the details of curriculum. But F.A., what's your answer to this question? What do you think the most important factor is in teaching in the online environment?
Yeah, I'm coming from a different background. Like I'm a marketeer. I'm not an expert on education and teaching, but my experience with when I'm talking with the student community, especially at Koç University, the most important element the students are mentioning about is the interaction, as Maha suggests, like the human interaction between students and professors or lecturers. That's why like keeping that as a most important part of this online education will be very beneficial for all parties, and also the best experience to have it in this way. And they suggesting some additional features, like it's again there. I'm 100% agree, like we shouldn't be that much technology obsessed, but still we can benefit from it, like to create that human connection, like some features in Zoom, like raising your hands, or using the chat box as old school forum type, like interacting about the topic, interacting about the content. I guess this kind of overall, like kind of appropriate aggregation of technology and human interaction, especially for human interaction, will be the best solution, I guess, to maintain that kind of classroom interaction on an online version.
Right. Thank you, Fa. Ibrahim, how about you? What do you think is the most important factor in teaching online?
I'll tell you our experience. That is, we decided from day one to have an international observer for the teacher, to give teacher a daily feedback, and how we encourage the teacher to use a flipped classroom. And after 10 days from the crisis, we have put standards for all teachers they have to follow, to make sure that, as Efe said, there's all students are on mute, how teacher he can control the classroom, and then how teacher he can engage the students, and how he can use the technology to encourage teamwork, critical thinking, and get the students also engage with each other to do their assignment and their projects. I think the most important thing is having standards and having feedback for teacher on a daily basis, and an agile model to improve teaching. Thank you.
That's interesting. So you monitor the teachers, and each day you tell them your impressions of how they did or how they might improve. Is that correct, Ibrahim?
Yes, this is correct. Is feedback in a daily basis, working in uplifting the teacher using technology, and getting an observer to help the teacher to improve himself in delivering online. It's an agile, it's a continuous learning for teacher and students, and understand the feedback from the students reflected to the teacher and the other way around.
Okay, thank you. Mani, what's your answer to this question? What do you think the most important factor is in teaching online?
I think, to put it simply, to have the basic understanding that this is not an in-person environment anymore, and to thus act accordingly, because it is easy. And of course, I mean, I'm sure we've all heard quote unquote complaints about that students just sort of fall off the radar, or think it's easier to kind of hide, or they're not as detectable virtual now. And talk about forever about taking attendance, taking attendance on Zoom versus taking attendance in the classroom and things like that. So I think, how they say desperate times call for desperate measures. So those measures would need to be stepped up especially by the faculty. I think the faculty member should take initiative, and the largest onus lies on them to keep that contact, not just for the sake of the grades, but actually just on principle, that the learning process needs to continue as coherently and cohesively as possible. If we have students with disabilities, for example, then obviously that is also going to take a more intimate form, a more interpersonal form, if you will, even if it's not face-to-face interaction.
Great, thanks. So when I talk to professors about moving to the online environment, one of the things they say is that in the classroom, one of the things you know where people are sitting. So there's always those people who sit in the back of the room because they're sort of trying to keep under the radar. There's the students who are the eager learners in the front of the classroom that you can make eye contact with. And you can sense when students are slinking off and, checking their email and not paying attention to your lecture. And then suddenly you're in this online environment where you don't get that feedback, that eye contact. You can't watch the students. So you need to come up with new ways to figure out how they're engaging or how they're, if they're paying attention to content. So Maha, what are some ways you can do to kind of make sure students are awake and alive and paying attention?
Let me just remind you that even when you're in the classroom, they might look like they're doodling.
Sure.
They might look like they're paying attention to you, but they're thinking about something else. So remember that you didn't even know that was happening in the classroom. Now, depending on the size of your class, obviously the bit larger the number, the harder it is. But let me do something right now. We have an audience right here that I can't see, right? And I'm going to ask them now to type in the chat one thing they're doing to help their well-being during this crisis. And let's see how many of the 78 will write something. Okay. Now, if you keep doing things like that, I'm serious about this. I'm asking the audience right now, type in one thing that you're doing to help your well-being in this crisis. And I actually did this with my students. I do something, at least one activity in the class that is something, even if they haven't prepared, they'd be able to do. And that they can type it in the chat or speak out loud, or they can choose to turn on their camera or not. It's up to them. That everybody can participate in. And people are starting to say things here, like learning new things and daily exercise and inspiring stories and fresh air and breaking the routine. And sometimes I'll ask them to send me a link to a social media page that inspires you. And then others can comment on them. They start interacting with each other. So that's one thing, is use something like the chat when you have large numbers. And read out what they're saying. People are doing like coloring online, so you're not even printing them out. That's really good for the environment, right? But I like that a lot of people are trying to learn something new, exercise and walking, yoga, so I'm seeing this, and even though I can't talk to each one of them, I'm still making connections with what they've written. Right. So that's one thing. Another thing that works really well if you're using something like Zoom is to break them out into small groups. It's much harder to interact if you're like 20 people or obviously 100 people. So if you break them out into groups of 2 or 4, let them do something. Let them take notes like on a Google Doc and come back and report back on what they've learned. And you just give them there like 15 minutes and they come back to you. This is like breaking them up into small groups in the classroom. And like, I'd be happy if anyone has questions or wants to try something to contact me on Twitter. I'm at @Dali_Mahan. I'm happy to help anyone brainstorm things like that. But I'm curious to hear what the other folks here do. And obviously, if folks in the chat also teach and they have an answer to that, I think it would be okay for them to also.
Yeah. No, it's been great. It's interesting to see what people are doing. Thank you for that. We've already made the session more interactive. Amani, ideas here for keeping people engaged?
Well, again, of course, it depends, again, on the nature of the class, of the material, of course, as well as the size, the class size, just like Meha kindly said. I think diversifying also the class, by activity as per the material that is to be covered, just like we do in the regular classroom, not to replicate it sort of as a mirror image, but rather what works in the classroom in terms of basic principle will, generally speaking, I believe, work in a virtual environment. Bearing in mind, of course, that there are some factors that need to be borne in mind, like, for example, the issue of time lag. We talked about connectivity earlier. We have to be patient with ourselves and with each other. We also have learned the practical way that just because someone doesn't answer within 2 or 3 seconds does not mean that he or she has not heard you. So that we also have to account for that. There has to be kind of a time allowance, if you will. Activities, again, are going to vary. So, for example, if you're going to have group presentations, for instance, or group presentations about a particular topic, you can have, you can have them choose their own groups, even live, just like they do in real life. Students like that. They like to feel a sense of autonomy. especially that they are grown. I mean, okay, young, but still, I mean, grown enough, young men and women to want to feel that. And actually, one of the challenges that we face as faculty also, especially for fresh out of high school students, is that we try to negotiate that fine line between you're just fresh out of high school and also that now you're turning into a responsible adult who's responsible for showing up and committing to class and so forth. So yeah, that's just off the top of my head.
Great. Ibrahim, how about you? What are your ideas for making sure that students are paying attention or engaged?
Again, on top of what Maha and Amani just mentioned, but our target audience of students are most vulnerable youth and refugees. So first of all, make sure that the youth, they have the right connection. So we decided to send to all our youth high speed of internet for them and their family to make sure the students are connected. And those students, they don't have tablet. We decided to send them the right tablet to continue their education. So we are talking about 7,000 youth. So we requested from our donor, and thank you for those donors that responded quickly. Abdulaziz Al Ghurer Foundation and UNICEF, they responded quickly to the crisis. On top of Luminous, we have been able to send all our youth the right connectivities, the right tablet. On top of that, our call center was operating for 12 hours to make sure that the students, they have any technical problem or any support they need, they have the right answer. And the fourth thing is, again, what Maha and Amani said is on top of what they said, which is make out like this is what exactly we're doing, but you have to have the right technology in place to enable teacher to do the right engagement, to engage the students well. So you need not only Zoom, so you have to have the right learning management system. The teacher have to be trained how to engage students, the activities, and number five, which is we find it very, very important, how you make youth are more interested by bringing people from industry, speakers, engaging speaker from the international market. Let some teacher to be joined by teacher from other country. So it's all about how to look at youth, how they want to be. Like the youth are very talented and very smart, that more than what we think. For understanding their feedback and creating a war room to create an action immediately and to keep them engaged, this is, I think, in my opinion, is very key. And to be transparent with them. And if we can deliver something like we open an email for students, tell us how we become better. Tell us what do you think we can do better? And we find out a lot of feedback from youth are living in a camp or living in a remote area, giving us an amazing idea that really impacted our way of delivering things. And that's why the attendance rate was increased tremendously.
Yeah, it's great. It's sort of interesting. You're kind of speaking more at a systems level, but it's still really important for keeping the students engaged. So you basically have almost like a suggestion box where they can make tips. And I love the idea of bringing in outside speakers, because in a lot of ways that's easier now than it was before, because you don't have to fly them in, and people are hopefully relatively available. And you get a fresh voice. And maybe when I was a student, I always wanted to hear from people working in my profession and ask them simple questions, basic questions about career issues. So I like that idea. And I also wanted to underscore the importance of small groups. I was taking an online class myself, and I noticed even in a class of 30, people seem very reluctant to speak up. But when the teacher split them up into groups of 4 or 5, suddenly everybody became very chatty and everybody was talking. And then we could bring some of that from the small group back into the larger group. Efe, ideas from you about keeping students engaged in the online environment.
We hear amazing ideas. I especially loved Amani and Umay's experiences about like their ideas about how to do that, and especially the autonomy and small groups are excellent ideas. Like it should be undercovered, and also like what Ibrahim pointed out about keeping the level of technology like everyone for everyone available. It's also a very important point, like because even we have the all infrastructure, everything. To provide that kind of engagement, to provide that level of education, we should be sure about the students have also the similar technology to keep it up. That's why it's also an important point.
Great, thank you. So another question that I had queued up really kind of echoes some of the issue that Maha brought up about social and emotional support for students. And I think in listening to the discussion yesterday, I suspected that some of these emotional and mental health issues might be an issue, but it really came to the fore yesterday in some of the discussion that it's clear that students are feeling isolated, anxious, and that these are very real issues. And as educators, people will have to figure out ways to address this, and psychosocial support is not always, even when classrooms are face-to-face and institutions are fully up and running, is not always what it might be. So anyways, ideas about this. I'm going to ask you last, Maha, I think, 'cause you probably have a lot to say, but Amani, how were you able to support your students? And you're a relatively new institution as well. How can you connect with them and make sure that they're okay and reassure them?
Sure. And what a great question. I mean, it is easier to feel anonymized in the online environment, obviously, for all the clear reasons. So I think the key to this is to, as much as possible, to tune in to the various students that we have through different measures. Indices, we can call them participation, nature, and amount of input they put into class, how well they adhere to, how well they're committing to class in terms of meeting deadlines and the nature of the work. I think in terms of, trying to connect with them on a level where when you see that things have started to slip, I think inboxing them, emailing them on just one-on-one really does make a whole world of difference, and they completely appreciate it. I mean, they will just rise, to the occasion, and they will email you back, and they'll be, yes, professor, I've been slacking off, blah, blah, blah. I've had issues. Yes, I would appreciate please speaking with you. Those one-on-one sessions, even if they're just 20, 30 minutes long, they really do make them feel reassured. And it's just the feeling of, I'm not just one among many who are being taught in this class. Because yes, we are dealing holistically with the class, but also each person matters. And I think that just because, speaking of psychosocial support, just because a person does not have a disability per se, it doesn't mean that they feel well and safe all the time. Sometimes, just even as able-bodied people, sometimes there are days that we feel in the morning that we can't get out of bed for no clear physiological reason, but because we're bogged down by things that bother us, right? Or because we're worried, we're anxious about what's coming ahead. We don't feel like going to work, and we're kind of in the whirlwind of having to commit because there is an institution that we answer to, and that we do have students that we answer to. So I think if we imagine what the students are going through, I think they're going through probably a tougher time because they are not quite in that adulthood zone yet, where they have enough spins around the block, so to speak, to be able to have a better toolkit to handle things. So I think just to come full circle with what we said earlier in terms of the onus and the burden lying on the faculty as a teaching, faculty member to reach out to the student. Taking that first step will also make them know for a fact that you are available, that it's not just empty talk. And just all it takes really is the click of a button, not a whole lot more.
Right. Okay, thanks. F.A., what about, what are you aware of at Koch in terms of sort of any, both personalizing courses and also potentially, psychosocial support for students? What are you able to, presumably people can't walk into student counseling offices now. How can they get support in this COVID-19 environment?
Yeah, as you mentioned, like normally we have the counseling services for students, also for the faculty members and administrative staff. But as it's obvious, like we cannot maintain it at the moment as like personally. Then we continue to do it as virtual as well, like as online connection with Zoom and other stuff. Like the psychosociological counseling is still going on at the campus, but also another important point, like after this COVID-19 events happening, like people, especially the students, are also distracted from their extracurricular activities, from their campus life, from the cultural activities they are engaging, the student clubs, most importantly, especially for freshmen or the second year students. In order to like substitute that kind of daily life habits and attitudes, also like engagements, like the thing like at Koch we are trying to do some extracurricular activities on online version, for example, esports or some computer games, chess tournaments, or some virtual book clubs, virtual movie clubs that people can engage with other students, with the community in the campus as an extracurricular activity on a virtual base. It can be also a supportive. It can be also a supportive feature that we can help students to maintain their psychological health, well-being, their psychosocial well-being, and also like another idea, like I have. In the classroom between teachers and students, like it's another normal distance learning period, like it's a forced distance learning and it's a forced online education, then it can be underlined like the both sides, both students and the teachers, also lecturers, experience the same thing, like we're experiencing all this COVID-19 events in a same manner. That's why underlining like we are in the same side, like we have the same problems, we have the same distraction points as well, also can create a kind of empathy among the sides between students and teachers, that it can be also a helpful point to maintaining that well-being in terms of psychology.
That's great. I like the way you did, social activities, movies, chess club, and keep those things going so that people can connect, or students can connect, and not just in the classroom. That sounds great. Ibrahim, what about at Luminous? It seems like you're aware of this issue. What kind of psychosocial support can you offer to students in this environment?
Actually, from day one of the crisis, we have created a call center for our international students. They are alone in the country, where they can have the service from their advisors in 24/7. We give them 24-hour services for emergency. The same for our international teacher. This is number one. Number two, in top of what Avi said, there's activities for the students, especially when we have full lockdown, because the students, they have a lot of time alone in the house. They can't even go and walk. So we make sure that we have enough activities to encourage students to do things together and to address social issues. And also, we've been very active in communicating with the students a lot of other education provider activities like webinars, speakers, etc. And we take this opportunity to tell stories. For example, we let our alumni to go and speak with the students for their success story, how their journey was, and it's continuous like this.
That's great. Well, there's been a lot of good ideas here. We're coming up on question period in 5 minutes. So please do submit any questions that you'd like to get to these speakers. I wanted to put in two little logistical plugs here. One is we're going to be sending out a survey tonight or tomorrow about the conference. At the bottom of that survey, though, there'll be an opportunity for you to tell us what ways are that we might extend the learning going on here. So I've learned a lot, even though I'm not a professor, in this session today about how I might teach better in this environment. So we're trying to figure out if there's ways that we could keep this going, a weekly webinar, a discussion group every other week, a variety of other ideas. But if you go into our survey and take the time in there, you can help us figure out ways to keep what's happening in this conference going. Let's go ahead and ask I'll just ask one more question, and we should probably be fairly quick so we can get to the questions. But of course, at least among students, the least popular part of learning is assessment and tests and papers, in which teachers and professors try to determine if they've learned what they're supposed to have mastered in the course. How can we do that in the online environment? How is it different? So briefly, Maha, what's your answer to this?
So very briefly, I think when we go online, we need to sort of rethink something and to realize that in the real world, students do have access to Google. And therefore, any assessments that we ever used to do that the students can answer on Google are probably really bad assessments. I'm sorry if anyone that was their paradigm. So that's the most important thing, is to think about, well, actually, this is closer to real life, so why don't you make your assessments closer to real life and more authentic? So, I mean, look, there are institutions who are getting these online proctoring tools that will watch students in their homes and make them even more anxious at a time of a lot of anxiety. This is highly problematic, and our students really we're not happy with that, and our institutions trying to reduce it, because that's not really, real life is not like that. I think trying to find assessments that have the students do something useful and meaningful and real and developing their critical thinking is going to make a huge difference. And letting them do something that's interesting to them as well. Like, I've changed my assessments so that students could choose a COVID-19 related topic to be able to do it. There's a lot of disciplines that can do that. I understand you can't do that with math. Maybe you can do it if you're doing a statistics course, but finding ways to make it relevant to students, you'll probably be happier with what you grade if you're letting students do something unique and different, where they're not even all doing the same thing, but all learning the same outcomes. But
right. So I think it seems like some of what you're saying is that giving students a chance to integrate, synthesize, analyze, and not just regurgitate. Amani, what's your institution, or what are you doing about assessment and testing?
Yes, so going off of especially the tail end of what Maha was saying, so we talk about lockdown browser and all those, mechanisms that try to catch students in the act, so to speak, or in order to discourage academic dishonesty, and not the least of which is plagiarism, or having people dictate answers to and so forth. And I completely believe that there are, of course, pros and cons to everything, but we have to look at what is outweighed by which. And I do think that the problems that come out of this, I think, are worth considering not implementing those until perhaps, I don't know, sometime in the future when they perfect those elements or mechanisms. Maybe that's for a separate time. That becomes a different story. And I personally also agree that, for example, in our case, we do timed assessments. Okay, so they have, like I said earlier, the timed, specified, pre-specified slots in which they get to answer the exam. There is a great point to also take into consideration that if you think about it, again, the nature of the assessment, good or bad, like Mel was saying earlier, if your assessment is designed such that it's not just something that you can pull off of Google or memorize and simply regurgitate the answer or parrot what you've memorized prior. There's no way really that you can be very resourceful in dragging out all the answers and placing them on the script that you have to submit your answer sheet. It's just not going to happen. And especially that the time allowed is always designed be deliberately, so as not to leave too much time anyway, even for an in-class, in-person assessment. And we've seen it actually in the results, for example. I mean, even after online assessment, where supposedly, of course, they do have internet access, they do have access to other folks who might be in their surroundings, but we've had multiple failures, for example, in sciences in particular, which, if anything, indicates that there is something to be said for, well, there's only so much dishonesty that you can engage in, even if you have the premeditation to do that.
Amani, I hate to cut you off, but we're moving into question time now. Efe, just quickly, what about testing and assessment in your case?
Like as Maha and Amani underlined, like there are the classical methods or some technological abilities that we have, like the Panopto or Blackboard or Zoom assignments and everything. But the most important question that I guess it's still not fixed about how to continue the research on its assessments, especially with the laboratories that the physical appearance requirements. That's why it's the main point, and I'm not sure yet, like how the other universities as well, like ongoing about their research, especially in laboratories, and maintaining the assessments about the experiments and the laboratory environment. This is another topic, but the otherwise, like the main, especially for undergrads and master programs, like the assessments are going on various types of it, like as Maha and Amani underlined, and it's going in the same way at Koç as well, like.
Okay, Ibrahim, how about how are you handling testing at Luminous?
We in Luminous believe scale. We want to go at scale, hundreds of thousands of students in the future. The new normals, the new usuals for us is a teacher, they deliver classes, and another team, they will do the assessment in the outcome or the main competencies the students have to have. So we're gonna split the assessment than delivering the education, and this will ensure that is a standard of outcome competencies-based education can be delivered at scale when we have very clear assessment. Putting in consideration what Maha said is very important, that any assessment have an answer in Google it will not get us the outcome that we needed. For us, we believe if we want to deliver education at scale, that it have to be very professional team working in the assessment, and our model is competencies based, so we'll work in a standardize the assessment in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ibrahim. Okay, I'm going to try to move to questions. There's a lot of good ones. We may not be able to get all of them, but I noticed that Emma Bonar of the Norwegian Refugee Council asked, how do we account for the significant amount of personal and social development and learning that comes from unstructured interactions face-to-face in a classroom environment? And how do we measure those outcomes? So interesting question. There's ways that students may grow as human beings with all of the in-person interactions in a classroom. Is there any way to replace those or measure those in this online environment? Maha, did you want to speak to that?
So I actually have this, and it's a sort of also a response to what Naya was asking earlier and now. So first of all, I highly recommend the use of semi-synchronous spaces. So this obsession with Zoom, I understand, because it takes less preparation and because people need to see each other in this socio-emotional isolation. But semi-synchronous spaces are actually much more inclusive, and so I'll tell you what I mean by semi-synchronous. I'm saying like WhatsApp groups. It's a space where everyone's together, so there's the room to support each other, not just the teacher and the student. And it's a space where people, if they're all there at the same time, they'll have a small conversation as if they bumped into each other in the cafeteria. But if someone comes in 2 hours later, they'll still see it. And if they want to participate, they can. If they don't have to. It's sort of an informal space. It's not a space like if you miss something, it's going to be a huge issue. So we're not going to talk about like important assignments or something. If you miss it, it's a big deal. But it's just, if you have a quick question, you can ask it. So WhatsApp groups, if people know Slack, there's a tool called Slack that does this really nicely, and it's better organized than WhatsApp. Something like Twitter. So those kinds of spaces, I think, help a lot with this informal type of interaction, and it's kind of asynchronous, so it's more inclusive. If someone has bad connectivity, they can still manage that. And then the other thing is there are ways to have students interact, but the problem right now is I think they're having trouble with time management. And so asking them to do things on their own time, they don't always manage to do it. But if they're able to manage their time a little bit better, there are a lot of ways to interact and give each other feedback on things like a Google document and putting comments and things like that.
Okay.
So thinking about those other ways of interaction. Right.
Essentially, for those not conversant with these kind of synchronous, asynchronous terminology, if you have a student who's losing internet connection some of the time, if there's a way that when they gain their internet connection again, if they can then dip in and participate, it makes it better for them than if they have to be online at a certain point in time. So that's where some of that discussion of asynchronous versus synchronous learning is steered. Does anybody else want to speak to this issue?
Yes,
No?
I can jump here and say that is the technology we are using, all classes, that we will stay for students for life. The student, they can have whatever they study by our technology for life. But the students, after a few years, he go into work and he realize, or he want to remember what teacher taught in classes. All this, we keep it in our LMS technology for the student for his life. And I think this is very important, especially when you teach some of the practical education or some of the method that the students want to go back to that classes in 5-6 years later, he can go and replay the classes. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was another question. A bit of echo there. Hopefully that'll go away. There's a question for you, Ibrahim, in the comments. Essentially asking about how your work with refugees, how do you address post-traumatic stress disorders and avoid triggers in learning? So obviously I'm sure this has been an issue for you even before the COVID-19 crisis. For those of you familiar with working with students with PTSD or highly stressed students, what are ways of dealing with that? Ibrahim, do you want to address that?
Luminous have a very good experience in dealing with low-income refugees, but during the crisis, I don't know how people can imagine people living in one container, 6-7 people in the family living in this containers is very tough. And most of our students, they will try to work to earn money. That's why having the call center extremely, extremely important. Listening to those refugees and most low-income people, understanding their problem and finding solution. I think the most important things is having a way to have proper feedback from them to solve the problem. So for example, some of those people, they have in their area not good connection. When you send the internet connection to the students, and then we realize there are a few hundred students, they are not connected. And when we call them, we realize even they don't have a charge in their phone. They don't have money to charge their phone. And then when we reach them through their friend or social media, where we know that is their interconnection in that area need different type. We have to charge their phone for them to be able to put the internet. This is a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. the students' feedback, teacher feedback, gonna revolve the whole way of delivering education. And I believe this is the new usual, the new normals, where it's gonna lead us how to do things differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I've been happy with the amount of insight that I've been able to gather from the session. I hope that the people, the attendees, feel the same way. I thank the attendees who we can't see for joining, and I thank the speakers for participating. This next session, which you need to join separately, is online education for jobs, which I look forward to. And I also wanted to encourage people to participate in the so-called happy hour or networking. You need to download the Run the World Events app to do that. But I tried it yesterday, and it's really enjoyable. You're connected somewhat randomly to people. You have 5-minute phone conversations. But I had a conversation with somebody from Ankara, someone from Erbil, and then someone from Liberia. So I got an interesting grab bag of some of the attendees at this session. So I wanted to encourage you to participate in the app. So next session, online education for jobs. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to end now. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.